When the Hansa Group acquired Fjord yachts back in 2006, one of the first jobs it put its mind to was the creation of a proper, dedicated, premium day boat, and it was called the Fjord 40 Open. It came with an elegant plumb bow, wide open decks, configurable furniture, so there are plenty of places to sit, to dine, to sunbathe, and it's been a really effective formula for Fjord over the years, so much so that it's been copied by various other manufacturers. But according to Fjord, the way people like to go day boating has slightly evolved during that time. They don't just want to enjoy themselves during the day, they want to have somewhere to sleep or maybe even to weekend. And this all new Fjord 39XL is their answer to exactly that conundrum. Now, one of the first and most interesting elements about this boat as I step on at the back end is the way it differs so substantially from the 38 Open, which it essentially replaces. Now, that 38 Open had no permanent sunbed, but we absolutely get that here. Part of the reason for that, of course, is the fact that this is 1.6 foot longer and also 9 inches wider in the beam. There's more space to play with, but also we got a shorter bow, and we'll see the way they've used that later on. What that does back here, though, of course, is enable us to use a proper dinette, just as we saw on the 38, but also have a permanent sunbed that opens aft onto this swim platform. So that's a very useful feature in its own right. And there is some lovely steel work here. I'm not a big fan of that, lovely though it looks, because I would anticipate myself using this particular seat quite a lot, and that's quite uncomfortable on your hamstrings as you sit there. But it certainly looks very slick. The swim platform itself is relatively narrow, big enough, but there's no space wasted back here. And it's not hydraulic either. They didn't want to introduce the extra weight back here. So what they've done is just go with a fixed platform. There's no option for a hydraulic one either. And it's the same story with the bulwarks. They're very raised, they're very secure. But in stark contrast to a lot of the trends for modern day boats, there are no options for fold down terraces, because again, that adds hydraulic weight, it adds complication, it adds cost, and they don't want that. They want this boat to drive properly, so there's not too much weight aft. In terms of the arrangement we see here, well, we've got a little grab handle here on the starboard side, plus a couple of receptacles in the deck for a ladder, so you can pull yourself out nice and easy. Over on the port side, you'll see we've got a cutout here. Now, this is primarily for Mediterranean use. You can fit one of those ultra clever passerelles that either drops down into the water for swimmers or lifts up to the pontoon when you're moored stern to a Mediterranean berth. But of course, this is a UK boat, so no need for that. So in the absence of that passerelle, what we do get on this port side beneath the deck is a very handy little storage space that's big enough in this case for the ladder that goes over on that starboard side. And in spite of the fact that this boat is the inboard variant, there's also an outboard variant, and we'll talk about that in a minute when we get down to the engine bay. We've also got a decent bit of storage space under this sun pad itself. Not as much, of course, as you would have with the outboard variant, in which case the space goes right down into the bilges and you can line it with all sorts of trays. It's very high volume, very large capacity. But as things stand, even though we have that bar in the way when you're sitting at the aft end, it's actually quite a useful spot to brace your feet. And we also get little automatic LED cylinders just to cast an ambient glow in the evening, make things a little bit more pleasant. Now, as I say, this boat is kind of optimized to enable you to spend the night on board should you wish, but it's still a proper dedicated day boat, and as a Fjord it absolutely needs to be. So what do you want from a day boat? You want fridges. Well, we have lots built into the bases. We have about 4 on this boat alone, and I think there are options for more. We also have speakers, I think about 8, plus a couple of subs and about 4 Fusion remotes, again littered around the boat, up at the helm, up at the bow, back here in the cockpit, down below. So it's very much a party platform, and the dinette absolutely reflects that. Now, what we have here are facing seats, transverse across the centre of this cockpit beneath the hardtop, and a couple of individual tables, both with folding leaves, so you can preserve a bit more in the way of ease of movement should you want it. But at the same time, this is a lot more versatile than the average cockpit dinette, because we have not just a reversible backrest, but individually operable reversible backrests. One here, one there, another couple on that forward bench. So you can rig this dinette in pretty much whatever way you like. You can have 8 people facing forward after that 3-man helm, so 11 people facing forward beneath the shelter of the hardtop. You can reverse these backrests and extend the sun pad to face aft. And although the tables are slightly in the way in this configuration, you can also slightly adjust these to create a more natural sort of lounge headrest when you want to just lie yourself out and get a little bit more decadent. And as for the tables themselves, well, at the press of a button, they can drop down into this space, and then we have an infill which is kept in the engineering locker further forward to turn this into a secondary sunbed. So it's very versatile in that regard. But what I like even more is the fact that, in stark contrast to the outgoing 38, which had a hardtop that was supported on struts that came down and were integrated with the galley, well, here we have a full beam hardtop where the struts come down directly to the bulwarks. So you're opening up that entire beam for day boating fun. And it feels all the better because, as I intimated earlier, they slightly shortened that foredeck and shifted the helm station forward. So we have more space to play with here. And that means not only do we get the dinette and that permanent sunbed further aft, but we get a proper transverse galley plus 3 helm seats ahead of that. And this galley really is a bit of a treat compared to the one that we saw on the 38, where the helm seats and the mouldings for the galley were kind of arguing with one another and overlapping. Well, here we get plenty of space. If I lift these up, you'll see what I mean. All we have here on this particular boat is a couple of chopping boards and a sink, in this case drained on the port side, so you can chop wet gear and just wash it down. It's very practical. We also have storage spaces underneath using natural teak, which is quite interesting because, as you can see, the deck is flexi-teak because it's more ecologically sound these days. More storage in the middle and a fridge. But if you like, you can also spec this space with an electric barbecue or an ice maker or whatever else fits your lifestyle. So it's very versatile in that regard, and there's plenty of volume on this particular boat to enable you to really work with that flexibility. Now, as we move to the side, you'll see something else that I enjoyed on the 38, which is present and correct here. Now you'll see, as I mentioned, that the bulwarks are very high. They came right up to hip level, so there's no need for guardrails on top of that. Instead, we have nice, thick, stainless steel rails built into the bulwarks, built into those mouldings with a good clearance for your fist, so it feels very secure. And the walkways are very broad in spite of the size of that galley. As I say, we've got 9 inches of extra beam here and it's well used. So it's a very easy boat to navigate around, and all the more so because of features like this. Instead of kind of cylindrical, bulbous fenders that stick out into your path as you're trying to move fore and aft, we've got these kind of squared off rectangular models that sit inside recesses in the bulwarks. So when you don't actually need them, they stay well out of the way. While I'm down here, it's worth just mentioning the quality of this steelwork because it really is rather lovely. We've obviously got these sunken cleats with the Fjord logo emblazoned on the top, and we also got these little stainless steel strips on the top of the gunnels there just to protect your fiberglass from rubbing lines. I like this too. I mean, on the face of it, you look at it and think, well, it's just a deck drain, and it is, but it's a marked upgrade over the 38. On that boat, we had a little step up, only half an inch or so you didn't actually notice it until you tripped over it. Well, this is an entirely single level deck all the way to the bow, and we'll go there right now because this is the part of the boat that exhibits the most radical change. Now, as I say, it's shorter than you might be used to seeing on the 38. On that 38, we've got a forward-facing bench seat, a couple of aft-facing benches further forward, and a table in the middle, so it's sunken, and it's a really sociable space for maybe 6 to 8 people to come and have lunch or a glass of wine and escape the party further aft. I loved that feature, but it, of course, ate up all the volume from the cabin down below. So here instead, what we have is a raised island sunbed. We still get nice deep walk-around decks here. But this is substantially elevated, as I say, and the purpose of that is not just to give you a space for a couple or maybe 3 people to lounge and face forward with a drink. It's also to generate the extra volume down below that the predecessor lacked. Now elsewhere in here, we've got a couple of other changes. So for a start, we got an anchor locker, or I should say a chain locker, that takes full advantage of that plumb bow. It's lovely and deep, lots of space for as much chain and line as you like. And we also have a slightly flared bow shape here. You see the bulwark slightly angle out, which means that even though we have this pretty generous island sunbed in the centre, we're not inhibited in the way we move around this boat in the slightest. It's very effective in that regard. And as we saw further aft, we also have more of these little LED cylinders just to light the place up in the evening. And if you want a bit of shelter, well, that's easily done. We've got little receptacles in the gunnels here for some poles which are stowed further aft beneath that sunbed. And the idea is that you can have a canvas bimini running off the top of that superstructure that enables you to walk full height beneath that without having to stoop. Now, if the Fjord designers are going to sacrifice that really excellent day boating bow on the 38 for extra cabin volume, then you want to know that it's going to be really properly used, and for the most part it absolutely is. Now, as you can see, there are no bulkheads in here aside from the one on the starboard side to cordon off the heads compartment, and that's exactly as you'd expect it to be. After all, this is a couple's boat. There's no need for additional privacy from other guests. So what we actually get in here, well, for a start, is excellent headroom at this entrance point. I reckon we got about 6'4" there to play with. Now, this finish here, incidentally, is Lisboa chestnut. They also do an oak and a mahogany and a walnut, but this is the most popular kind of finish on Fjord boats, and given that they have a Nordic heritage despite their German ownership, well, you can absolutely see why. It's very fresh and modern. It feels good. It makes the most of the light, and there is plenty of light. We've got good windows on the sides here at this entrance point, additional hatches around that island sunbed. I would actually like to see little glass cutouts in the bulwarks, just so that you can see through here and actually see the seascape instead of the moulding for that bulwark. But as I say, it's bright and it's very airy, and there's no sense of constraint in terms of headroom. Now, what we also have in terms of facilities on the port side is this unit here. As things stand, all we really have in there is a drawer fridge built into the underside there, but you can spec it with coffee machines or ice makers or microwaves, whatever else you fancy. Realistically, that's really to supplement the features for the day boaters up top rather than to supply yourself with breakfast. It's not that sort of cabin, but it certainly feels like a very attractive place to overnight. So I'll kick off my shoes, jump onto the bed and make my way forward to verify that, because as you can see, if I sit up here where the reading lights are, well, arguably, in terms of the taper of the thing, it's a little narrow if you and your partner were sitting up here reading a book, but the headroom's there. As I say, the light is there, and the scale of the bed is actually really good. We're on a 6-footer, and I reckon the length of the bed has to be a good, well, it's the best part of 7 foot. There's plenty of space above me and at the bottom there. A little bit of shelving on either side. Really good deep storage under the bed as well, plus additional hatch beneath the mattress, and further forward, of course, the battery and the bow thruster, but decent in that regard. And on this particular boat, we've got additional storage on the starboard side, an optional hanging locker. As we move back towards the entrance point, we've got some switch gear here on the port side, plus this little bit of clever LED lighting that enables you to just tweak the colours in whatever way you fancy, which is a lot of fun. But of course, the last serious section to investigate down here is the heads compartment. We'll do that right now. Now, you do need to, there's a 6-footer, stoop a touch to get in. As you can see, the threshold at the top end is around about 5'8", I would say. But once you're in here, this is really, really decent. Again, decent headroom, a toilet on the aft bulkhead, a good size of sink, a good size of window, too frosted in this case. We also have a hatch up onto the dash top, which is a very useful feature, both for natural light and ventilation. And we have a mirror here, kind of angled. It's not sufficiently angled for a 6-footer. You reckon you've got to stoop a little bit to see yourself. If you're 5'6", that's perfect. But what you don't necessarily expect on a boat of this scale, and particularly a boat of this kind of application, is a proper separate shower compartment. Now, I call it a compartment. It's not quite that because the perspex screen stops around about shoulder, chin level. But there's plenty of headroom once again. There's ventilation from that hatch up top, and there's a nice little seating section down below as well. It's very civilised indeed for a spot a weekend in, and if all you really need is just a rudimentary shower after you've been in the salt water. Then of course we have hot and cold water after that transom shower too. The last bit to check out then before we head out on the water and see how this boat performs is the engine bay. Now that's accessed via this port seat. It hinges right up laterally, and that actually gives you some really good access down into the space. There's a ladder rigged ready for that, and a decent strength of ram here to hold that lid up, so it's not a struggle at all. And the first thing I see when I get down in here, even though it's very tight, there's quite a low deck head there, and those engines really do fill the space. But what I can see at the entry point is your fuel filters, exactly where you'd want them, very accessible, nice and easy. Aside from that, there's not a lot in here. As I say, this is the inboard version, of course. It uses a pair of D6 440 stern drives. That's not the standard fit out. The standard is a pair of D4 320s, but so far absolutely nobody has spec'd that. So with these larger D6 440s, well, you're adding a couple of 100 kilos per unit, but of course we don't have the hydraulics for the platform, we don't have the hydraulics for drop down terraces, so an extra bit of weight aft on this particular boat is not a problem at all. And apparently it gives us around about 38 knots, and we'll verify that one way or the other when we get out on the water. Now there is a secondary engineering space further forward beneath the deck, again running laterally, and that contains your tanks, your freshwater tank, your black water tank, and your electrics. As things stand, there's not much else to look at apart from that. We do have space for a seakeeper, but so far that's not actually an option on this boat. We also have space for a small generator, but again, this test boat, though it's very high spec, is not fitted with that. And if you prefer the idea of generating your own power, well, we've got that big hard top anyway, so you can get plenty of solar panels up there. And you could also spec the uprated lithium-ion battery bank just to keep all those day boating fridges running happily. We're out on the water now in a very chilly breeze, and we'll get going in a sec, but as usual, I want to have a quick chat about the Helm before we do that, because it's really quite interesting. Now, as I say, that galley extends transverse a good proportion of the beam, so in front of that we got space for not 2 but 3 helm seats, and it's good to see that the skipper himself sits at the centre of those. It wasn't the case on the 38. I think we were perched slightly out to starboard. Now, that's particularly beneficial because we don't have an option for skylights in this hardtop. So even though this boat heels over pretty hard in the turn, as you'll find out when I get underway, you don't find that your view on either side is restricted by being pushed over to one side when you heel over to port. So that's really quite useful. And I also like the fact that we've got proper protection here. This is seriously ramped up over the offering that we got on the 38. We've got a nice lofty screen, goes way up, so we've got an excellent view of the horizon. And we've got good protection here too. We've got these little lateral wings come out from the screen itself, and they do a pretty good job. I mean, I got it wrong a couple of times earlier, and there was some water ingress, as you kind of expect on a boat of this kind, but none of it made its way inboard to these seats. And you have to look further aft to see the splashes, and it actually happened pretty much at the back end of the dinette there, so that's not bad at all. As regards the steering position, well, as I say, I love being, as a keen driver, bang in the centre of the deck, and that's pretty much where I am here. I also love the clarity of this particular dash. There's pretty much no switch gear, so you think, well, it's all going to be digital switching, which after all is the modern trend, and we got a couple of optional 16-inch Simrad plotters to cope with that. But actually, if you look up in the kind of offshore pilot house fashion, we got a set of essential switches backlit up here, plus another fusion remote, so that keeps everything brilliantly tidy. And everything we want here is exactly where you'd want it to your right hand, your twin throttles and your joystick. We got a little chain counter here too, and a VHF. There's the engine display below these optional 16-inch plotters. I should say a single 12-incher is standard. And this beautiful kind of spider-like stainless steel wheel with a bit of leather trim around the edge. We see this on Fjords a lot. It's a lovely little touch. The touch points on these Fjords really are bang on. Good grab rails as well for the guys on either side, and plenty of room, which you might anticipate wouldn't happen for access down into that cabin in spite of this third helm seat. But anyway, that's enough of me gassing. What we really want to do is get underway, so we're going to do that right now. And I think you're likely to be pretty impressed by what you see, because it's very easy to look at these super stylish day boats like these Fjords and imagine that they're not really performance machines at all. But with these twin 440s down there in that engine bay, I've got to say, it's a bit of a driver's machine. So we'll get up and running, and we'll do that relatively slowly at first because there's a couple of things to note. Now, firstly, there's the fact that with that plumb bow and that elongated waterline length, the tracking is absolutely rock solid when you're off the plane. But as we move up through the gears, just add some revs, you'll also notice, as intimated earlier, there's virtually no weight aft to upset things. This is a very well balanced boat. We've got a really big fuel tank, 1140 litres, and that sits deep beneath this section of deck, so that's exactly where that ought to be. And the result of that is that well, we find ourselves planing flat and controlled from about 14 or 15 knots upwards. So that's a lovely user-friendly kind of trait. Enables you to drive to the conditions very effectively. So we can trimmer right out, really lift those legs, and that obviously pushes that waterline aft, increases our efficiency, and actually the efficiency is very good. Gets plenty of range from that big tank, and we'll talk about that in a second. But for now, what I want to do is just throw into a couple of turns just to show you exactly how it is. We'll go to starboard first, just heel her over, and you'll see we're looking right down at the water there. Now I can trim in and I can cast hard, or I can put on some more throttle. I can just ease the legs up a touch more, dial in a bit of slip, and you see how easy this is, really novice friendly. And of course we can do the same to port. We're just going to nip over our own weights here before we do that. There we are, and we're doing 37 knots. Over the port we go, and we can just add a little bit of trim, power around this, endless reserves of grunt, loads of grip from those 440s. Really enjoyable way to drive a boat that. You never feel like you're losing momentum or losing shape. So in spite of its appearance as a very kind of sunny weather, sophisticated premium med day boat, it is a bit of a performance machine, I have to say. Now let's get her back on the straight and discuss those efficiency figures, because as I say, they're pretty impressive. Now, the old 38, that came with a 600 litre fuel tank, which really reinforced its status as a day boat, because that doesn't give you much in the way of range. Well, here we've got twin 570 litre tanks, right in the centre of the deck, exactly where you'd want them in terms of weight. So that gives us, saving about 20% redundancy in the system, about 900 litres to play with. Well, at everything from 20 to around about 35 knots, we're seeing a combined fuel flow of between 3 and 3.5 litres per hour disappearing from those tanks. So we got a usable range of between 250 and 300 miles, which is exceptional and really reinforces the fact that this boat isn't just a day boat. It's designed for a bit of extended cruising too, a little bit of overnighting. And even if we push right on to the top end, which in spite of their modesty in saying it was 38 knots, is actually about 42. Well, even then, we're barely drinking more than 4 litres per nautical mile. So we're still seeing a very generous range in the region of 220, 225 miles. So that is excellent. Now, as you can see, I'm pretty impressed with this boat, but I am a little bit chilly. It's about 2 degrees here today, and I'm feeling that on an open boat like this, even with the shelter of this structure. So if it were down to me and I wanted to use this boat more frequently and in more ways, well, I'd investigate the option of some aft canvases that connect up with that sunshade and really cordon off this section of the boat from the elements. Opt for the diesel heating as well, and you've got yourself a much more comfortable boat for days like this. And there is one other option that I ought to mention while I'm here at the helm, because having complemented that lovely lofty screen and the visibility and the shelter of this boat, well, apparently you can have that screen instead 2/3 height with a gap over the top to give you a proper sense of open boating. Well, that makes a bit of sense for the Mediterranean, I guess, but as far as I can see, the rim of that would get pretty much in your eye line as regards the horizon. And as you can see on a day like today, the full screen is more practical anyway, so that's probably not an option I would look to take. Well, we're back alongside now, and I have to say that was really a tremendous amount of fun from a helming perspective, and that's not something you might necessarily expect from a boat that looks as elegant as this, but it really is. It's very soft riding, it's very novice friendly, there's plenty of power, plenty of controllability, so it's great fun from the Helm. But of course the key issue with this day boat, this new day boat from the day boat specialist Fjord, is whether or not it makes sense to sacrifice that excellent bow lounge we saw on the 38 and replace it with the extra volume of the cabin. Now, for my money, I'm not convinced that day boaters really do want that. But if Fjord is right, and that's the kind of thing they're after, then this new Fjord 39XL is a superb way to achieve it.